Berlin has had to overcome major obstacles to become the social and cultural center it is today. From an aquifer base that limits the capacity to erect tall buildings like those found in other European capitals, to a war-torn and occupied past that destroyed and completely marked the city. Berlin, however, has managed to pick itself up and today plays host to a considerable number of high-rise buildings. With Frankfurt, it is one of the German cities with the largest number of this type of constructions.
Berlin is an interesting city because it seems very simple, but in fact it's very difficult. It is difficult for two reasons. It has an aquifer substrate that does not allow for the erection of tall buildings, which is quite curious. It is not that nobody wanted to build upward in the city, it is that it was not possible. And since it was not possible, it was prohibited by regulation. There, buildings are not allowed to exceed a certain height, and they do not. So when they have to build something large, laying the foundation is torture. For example, Berlin Central Station, which is a wonderful building, was built with a foundation that needs port-type concrete caissons. In other words, it is built as if it were in the sea, curiously enough, and that is what is needed to make those buildings possible. Otherwise, they could not be built. There is a very famous glass tower designed by a truly great architect, Mies van der Rohe, which rises upward and stands out very little. But it does stand out thanks to the fact that, being made of glass, it weighs little and the project was able to move forward. It was never built in the end, but it became a symbol of overcoming that enormous difficulty. And then the second difficulty Berlin has faced is that it was battered in the war, completely destroyed. The curious problem was that when it came to rebuilding it, they could not make improvements that would have made mobility in the city easier. Changing the cadastral system was so complicated that they preferred to rebuild it as it was, with very small modifications to solve specific traffic problems. The public did not want to change the city, and it still has the feel of having been built from the beginning, even though the buildings are very powerful, very new and very splendid. Berlin is a kind of encyclopedia of architecture. Just as in Madrid we prioritized mobility over residence, in Berlin the buildings all have a signature and architects travel there on pilgrimage.
After the war, military occupation and the creation of the Berlin Wall affected the city's form and the execution of architectural ideas and urban planning projects. The old city in the west was filled with life, whereas in the east a type of architecture which prioritized form over everyday use helped create a functional and aesthetic differentiation between the two sides.
And then, finally, there is the issue of the post-war occupation of a city divided in two by the wall, with completely different criteria for how one side was and how the other was. And that kind of scar, that change in the city's type, has been very skillfully preserved, suggesting where the wall ran and creating walking routes. In other words, turning history into an explanation of what you are seeing and doing it very well. So those three things make the city something very different. It is curious because in the West, the city had a recovery that made life very similar to what it had been before. A life that was very rich culturally speaking and, from the point of view of shops, situations, churches, buildings, everything, very attractive. And the other half, the eastern one, was a planned half, very much in line with the theories that were in vogue at the time. It was the city they had dreamed of as a model, and it is a failed city because it does not work well. The idea, for example, of the celebrated Le Corbusier, of having buildings on stilts in green areas with arteries crossing everywhere, from an urban point of view, is a disaster. Le Corbusier wanted to get rid of the street, and in the places where people followed him and got rid of it, the city simply does not work. So, in the eastern part of the city, the streets are lifeless. And in the western part of the city, the buildings almost disappear because the street is a huge source of vitality.
La ciudad tiene tal potencia que lo absorbe todo, y Berlín sigue siendo
The city has such force that it absorbs everything. Berlin remains a very attractive city. It had tax conditions and fiscal systems to attract people to live there that gave it enormous life. There were many people living with very little money and living in very peculiar ways, which generated a very attractive urban culture. The whole business with raves and all those things.
Pero la manera que tuvieron de acometer esta...
But the way they approached the rebuilding of the city's lost areas was through good architects and good buildings, but with little citizen involvement. The large squares were filled with hotels and buildings designed by very important architecture firms. The streets were filled with new buildings built by those architects. There are entire neighborhoods that are worth visiting because each house is a great sample of architecture. But the neighborhood itself may have ended up a bit bland, and the old area is better by comparison because its vitality has been preserved and the area stays alive.
Berlin has established itself as a major capital of culture. Its commitment to the film industry has allowed it to project its image to the rest of the world.
Cinema is very important for cities because it highlights some of the most powerful sources of energy they have and spreads them around. Just as in New York, we have Woody Allen present in every bridge you see, in every corner, in everything. Berlin also has fantastic theatre and films. They have a film industry there that is wonderful, right? And that has worked very well and has helped portray the city. But if you look closely, what are landscapes in New York are more like vital impulses in Berlin. That is, they are elements of action that occur in the city.
ACS, through Hochtief, has worked to recover some of Berlin's more iconic spaces, such as the Humboldt Center, executing its structural works and giving it a new use while remaining respectful of its past.
It was very controversial because the decision to recover that center with the cathedral on one side and the Humboldt Center on the other for culture was more or less agreed upon by everyone. But many people wanted a new, different building that would not bring back memories of what that place had been in the past, and that led to very strong debates. And ACS had a very important presence there. What it meant to restore a castle as an element was heavily questioned. But what has happened since, which is indeed very attractive and very important, has been the ability to turn something that was initially somewhat contradictory and faced a lot of opposition into something that people ultimately knew how to make and liked.